if anybody has.
Conservation organizations use bird monitoring to inform bird conservation. Um, I worked for quite a few years as the director of the Lake Michigan Bird Observatory. Back in those days, you may have heard the old name. It was once referred as the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory. Well, the observatory has moved on and changed its name to the Lake Michigan Bird Observatory, which is probably an easier name to remember. So, among the many methods of bird monitoring, the use of NEXRAD radar is a chief one. Uh, Helps us to show the vast extent of nocturnal bird migration. Most of you are probably aware that the majority of songbirds migrate at night, and there are hundreds of thousands of them passing over our heads while we're asleep on good nights of migration. Now, this doesn't happen every night, of course. It happens when the weather conditions are appropriate. So millions of birds move across the United States at night during some periods of their annual cycle. We'll show multiple methods to monitor and assess bird migration. So back in the early 2000s, uh, about 15 scientists, including Tim Vargo and myself, Owen Boyle, a number of other people, joined together to do bird monitoring on a large scale in Milwaukee County. The first name of that was the Milwaukee County Avian Migration Monitoring Partnership. That also got a name change to the Milwaukee Biome Project. We don't need to go into why. Uh, so the Biome Project was a long-term ecological research project on a local scale in Milwaukee County. Starting in 2007, our research focused on investigating the avian use of habitat in Wisconsin's largest urban area. We wanted to learn about changes in vegetation, changes in the ways birds and other organisms use habitat in an urban area, the effects of the presence of invasive plants, and spatial relationships between the study sites. What was their effect? So during that period of 2007 to 2015, we did hundreds of transect counts. A transect count is walking a measured route within a measured period of time located on each of our 8 study sites in the county. We did vegetation sampling on all those study sites, especially a set of several of them. We co-authored with our partners a chapter for our volume of Studies in Avian Biology, Urban Bird Ecology, and Conservation. So what did we learn? What's the importance of the years we spent on that? We knew, but we proved to ourselves again that migrating birds utilize a variety of stopover sites. One often neglected set of sites are in urban areas. Well, that's no longer true, of course, because there's been a veritable explosion of interest in urban ecology, and it's no longer true that it's neglected. Urban habitats include parks and natural areas, often characterized by some degree of disturbance. You will know that, of course, by going in any one of a set of Milwaukee County parks. Some are in much more pristine condition than others for horrendously long lists of reasons. Uh, and the degree of disturbance very clearly has an effect on birds' use of those areas. This was one of the first studies nationwide to focus on how birds' refueling and body condition are affected by the quality of those urban stopover habitats. So here's kind of a graphic representation of our 8 study sites. You'll see the ones in light green were upland sites, Warnemont, Falk, Lake, and Greenfield parks. The others were more riparian, the Riverside Park, Root River Parkway, Clutch Park, and Menominee Valley. And you can also read on the vertical axis there the level of disturbance. So as you start at the bottom of that graphic, those parks are more heavily disturbed. As you get towards the top, those are less heavily disturbed. And you can see them displayed on the map at your right. Transects were 250 meters long in length and 40 meters wide in width. Data was collected on all species found, the weather, the time of day, and the duration of the transect, as well as a measure of the degree of leaf development in the canopy on each one of those study sites over hundreds and hundreds of visits. So you can see some graybeards there. I've joined that category now. I'm 78. Some of those folks weren't even that old yet at that point in time, but they're coming up on that now. And some kind of middle-aged folks, like Chuck on the right there. So a lot of different people participated in this project over the years, as well as some younger folks. So we and our partners have cataloged data sets from the Biome Project, the Lake Michigan Bird Observatory projects, including Great Lakes pelagic surveys in conjunction with the Great Lakes Commission, the EPA Milwaukee Estuary Area of Concern Winter Harbor Survey Project, the Midwest Migration Network, which we helped to bring into being back in 2014, and their migration station projects, a long list of American kestrel nest box projects, regional point counts, etc. So who's used all this data? Well, it's been put to use right here at home. The Milwaukee County Parks Natural Areas Program used that data, and they continued doing surveys on those areas after the Biome Project reached its logical end. So they've done a singularly thorough set of surveys across the 10,000 acres of natural areas in Milwaukee County. So here's another project that the observatory was heavily involved in, along with a set of partners funded by the Great Lakes Commission. We surveyed via twin engine aircraft a number of areas across 3 of the Great Lakes during what was called phases 1 and 2 of a collaborative project. So we surveyed waterfowl. Our particular project was on the west shore of Lake Michigan, which you can see displayed in brown there. Those transects, we flew from Door County to the Illinois-Wisconsin border, from near the shoreline to 10 miles offshore. And our partners surveyed some areas in Lake Huron, Lake St. Clair, the east end and the west end of Lake Erie. Over the period of time we did multiple sets of those surveys by aircraft, we counted over 1.8 million individual birds observed during both phases, representing 53 different species and at least 40 pelagic waterbird species. Surveys in phase 2 observed fewer individuals than in phase 1, partly due to the fact that Lake Michigan and Lake Erie. Lake Michigan was 80% frozen in the spring of 2014, which is a condition that had not occurred for many decades. During that period of time, a lot of the waterfowl species that we were monitoring perished because they simply starved to death. There was no way for them to access open water because there was so much ice. So the observatory and our partners did surveys across the lakes. This image is one result of one of our partner, Dr. Allison Sussman's PhD work using our collective data on hot spots of waterbird persistence in the Great Lakes. The colors that you can see relate to the various different partners that were involved in of the Great Lakes, and to some extent the degree of intensity of color shows the persistence of those hot spots of uh, offshore waterfall. So these are waterfall that you don't see on an inland lake or pond. Uh, you see them on what shall we say, just deep water, just the Great Lakes and open waters of the ocean. So uh, we have to tell you one interesting fact about those long-tailed ducks, though. They lead a double life. In the summer, they're nesting on quiet little tundra ponds that are seldom more than 5 feet in depth. Uh, During the fall and winter, they migrate south to areas around the globe. So not just the Great Lakes, but the ocean coastlines of North America and Europe and Asia, places like the Black Sea. So all those places have long-tailed ducks in the fall and winter and early spring. Uh, Long-tailed duck as a global species is in decline. So we definitely want to know more about its population for a whole host of reasons. In an effort to address those questions, the project team set out to achieve the following 5 objectives. We built a community of Great Lakes avian researchers under the Midwest Coordinated Bird Monitoring Partnership. We formed a data sharing agreement where appropriate. We identified information gaps and priorities. We set about collaborating on future projects, and we built upon collective knowledge of birds' use of the Great Lakes. So here's one product of that work that shows long-tailed ducks by density. So you can see them, they're in the offshore environment, and the more intensely colored spots you see on each one of those uh, various months, right? The months go February, or rather, yes, February, March, and April. So as you get into April, you can see there are far fewer because those individuals are already migrating north of us into subarctic Canada, and they will continue on into the Arctic. But in late fall, winter, and early spring, they're arrayed along the lakeshore in areas of water between about 50 feet in depth and 200 feet in depth. So that's another one of the amazing characteristics of long-tailed ducks. They are the deep diving champion among waterfowl and water birds. They regularly feed on the bottom in water 200 feet deep. And unlike many other water birds, they not only use their feet and legs to dive, but they roll underwater with their wings. So that makes them different in another way as well. So you can see uh, on these maps uh, something about the bathymetry, the water depth the darker the blue color, the deeper the water. So those areas where we found longtails are again in that area of water depths between about 50 and 200 feet deep. Uh, Generally speaking, they're out of sight of land. I mean, the way this map represents their presence, you might think that you would be able to see them from land, but that's one of the reasons we did these surveys via aircraft because most of the time, many of those diving ducks are offshore in relatively deep water, and you can't see or count them from the lake shore. You have to see or count them from the air. So uh, the locations of concentration shift throughout each season, with areas of highest numbers traditionally occurring offshore from Ozaukee County north through Kewaunee and Door counties. You can see the five most common species on this map on the left. Uh, Displayed in different colors: bufflehead, common goldeneye, common merganser, long-tailed duck, and red-breasted merganser. So the, the magenta or extremely bright pink uh, representations there are those of long-tailed ducks, and you can see that they were often much further offshore than the other species. So gulls also we counted, and you can see the most abundant species in the map on the right and how they were positioned along the lakeshore along those transects as we observed them from the aircraft. So in 2012, 2013, this is a breakdown of our fall and spring numbers. And on the right, 2013, 2014 fall and spring numbers. So fall of 2012, you can see long-tailed duck is up there at the top with almost 30,000 individuals, or about 60% of the total. Red-breasted mergansers next, and the rest of the species come after that. On the right, fall of 2013, longtail was once again at the lead. Merganser, sometimes you cannot tell individual mergansers to species because many of the immature um, males look pretty much like females at that season, so you're not able to distinguish between common and red-breasted merganser. You just count them as merganser, comma, species. So in spring, our long-tailed duck numbers go down somewhat, simply because of the fact that they're already moving beyond our area by the time we're out there doing surveys. Uh, they're one of the first uh, northward migrants to return to the Arctic. So you can see in spring of 2014 in the lower right, we had an extremely large number of Bonaparte skulls on our surveys, almost 7,900. Uh, you may look at this graphic and ask yourself, well, why are SCOP so poorly represented? They're not poorly represented except in comparison to the high numbers of other species. So many of the SCOP that spend part of the autumn on areas of the Great Lakes, for example, Green Bay is a really important wintering area. Many of those individuals go further south for the actual winter and are not present at in extremely late fall or extremely early spring yet, compared with some of these other species. So the Midwest Migration Network took off in 2014. Uh, we got a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant to hire a coordinator who is still the acting coordinator. Dr. Amber Roth at the University of Maine. She was actually, when she started this work, she was actually teaching at Northern Michigan University. Uh, but she's continued to lead the network. So we have multiple aspects of the work of that network, including banding and ground surveys, uh, MODIS, and a number of other things. We utilize the Midwest Avian Data Center, another acronym that is a little awkward for some people. MWADC, we call it, as a repository of data of all of the monitoring data that we gathered. So here's one of the tools from the Midwest Avian Data Center. Uh, kind of shows the Great Lakes there and a number of different kinds of uh, projects that were done that gather data. If you were to click on the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory, you would see all of our data uh, generated on the map, which in the next few slides I will show you a little bit more detailed. So one of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service funded projects that we did back in between about 2010, 2012, 2013, we collected data from 80 different data repositories amongst an incredible array of different monitoring projects on the west shore of Lake Michigan, all the way from Michigan's Upper Peninsula through the lakeshore counties of Wisconsin into northeastern Illinois and northern Indiana. So we collected and display all those data as data points here that adds up to an unbelievable 1.3 million records of data. So you can, again, this is zoomed in from the map that I showed you 2 slides ago. This is all that 1.3 million data sources. You can see the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory box is checked over on the right, and that populates the map with all the data from those many different projects which included things like uh, state natural area surveys by the Wisconsin DNR for some years, uh, projects done by professors at Eastern Wisconsin universities and their graduate students, as well as uh, eBird data. So, like I say, 80 different project sources produce that data. So moving on, we in the year 2018, we did an urban monitoring project on chimney swifts and common nighthawks. We wanted to know which areas in our urban zone have nesting swifts, which do not, and why. We did a good job of answering those questions. So, paper that resulted from that was written by myself, Dr. Brian Lenz, who was the chief scientist at the observatory at that time, and Mike Schlotfeld. The observatory conducted a multi-pronged effort that focused on several important areas of urban bird conservation, monitoring and conservation of chimney swifts and common nighthawks. These two urban nesting species are in decline. Of course, they don't only nest in urban areas, so some chimney swifts and some common nighthawks continue to nest and breed in rural areas. I have to point that out. They don't only nest in urban areas, but in years past, they used to be exceptionally abundant in urban areas, and that is no longer the case. So how has their use of urban habitat changed. So this created an opportunity for both non-traditional urban monitoring using citizen scientists, some of whom came from the UEC. Have to give a shout out to Tim because he was an important partner in doing this project. So here's um, just a, a representation of the point counts that we did on 398 point counts. Those were spaced along routes within the city of Milwaukee and some Milwaukee suburbs. So this shows a mean group size at each one of those point counts of 5.55 birds. It ranged from one bird up to 124. The standard deviation for those who would be interested in that kind of a thing was 8.806. So uh, nighthawks were a completely different picture. We learned to our chagrin that while we were doing this was also one of the years of the Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas, we found 0 nighthawks on our transects, 25 different routes around the city and the county. The only nighthawks we found were in migration. Uh, Common nighthawk migration begins in fall in about mid-August, and you can usually see good numbers of birds passing south through Milwaukee County by about the end of the month, especially near the lake shore on nights with favorable winds. But during the summer breeding period, we found absolutely none. So this is just a view of some of those routes. You could see areas that you would be familiar with. There is a route that went west from the river in River West there. As far as Washington Park, there were routes that went north from near the Milwaukee Public Museum and north from other areas of the Lower East Side, one that went strictly along Wisconsin Avenue from 35th Street to the lakefront. There are some in that map on the right hand in West Allis, some that went from Wauwatosa to Elm Grove, some that cut through just Main Wauwatosa only. So at each one of those stops, the observer stopped for 5 minutes and counted all the swifts that they could see. What they did was they actually turned 360 degrees so they could see every bit of the neighborhood from where they were standing. Counted all the swifts that they could hear and see. They made note of chimneys that swifts seem to be using. Now, sometimes when you're doing a 10-minute point count, you don't actually see the chimney swifts enter a chimney, but sometimes you're lucky enough to actually see one enter. So one of the things that we also collect data on is how many of those chimneys on our study routes were capped, because once the chimneys are capped, the chimney swifts can no longer use them. And we found, sadly, that a great number of chimneys are capped, which prevents swifts from using them. So another project that we and many, many partners were involved in, uh, you can look at the map here of the US and southern Canada. There are breeding bird atlas projects for uh, almost every Canadian province and every Some states have moved on to their second atlas. We did the first one in Wisconsin from 1995 to 2001. We just recently completed the second atlas, which was run from 2015 to 2020. We're in the process of writing the second book. You can see the cover of the first atlas book in the upper right-hand corner of this image, which really gives us a look at all of the breeding birds of Wisconsin, where they are found, how abundant they are, and what kind of habitats they use. So this was a project that involved the work of thousands of individual atlasers and a significant team of scientists pulling all this together. So, what did the Atlas learn? This is kind of an overview of a number of different things that we learned. We had over 2,000 volunteers. We surveyed all the what are called the priority Atlas blocks. We uh, amassed 161,000 bird checklists. We found 243 bird species breeding in the state, and we submitted a total of 2.2 million observations. So you can see some of the findings displayed below there. For example, evening grosbeak, which used to be a familiar feeder bird in the northern part of the state 30 years ago. This species has greatly declined. You can see that by the two combined maps. Uh, those possible or probable are marked in purple, and you can see that the numbers of evening grosbeaks is way down over the first atlas. On the far right is the opposite kind of situation. So I have to tell you, when I first started birding in the mid 1950s, it was actually a big deal for me to find an orchard oriole. Orchard oriole has increased in population in Wisconsin since that time, and now it's a fairly common bird. And you can see that we have a graphic representation of how much more abundant this bird was on the second atlas than it was on the first in those two maps. So Atlas 1 is on the top with kind of limited purple, possible, probable blocks and a far improved uh, picture for this species on the lower map in the more recent atlas. Largest range changes since Atlas 1 in the middle there. Uh, the proportion of priority blocks occupied by a species during the first atlas 20 years ago to the proportion of priority blocks occupied by that species now, you can see there are some clear winners and losers, I guess you could put it. Trumpeter swan has increased dramatically, so has Merlin, orchard oriole, which I just mentioned to you, lark sparrow, Carolina wren. Carolina wren is probably a product of climate change because with milder winters, they seem to be moving into the state more readily. Peregrine falcon has increased, tufted titmouse, red crossbill, dick thistle, and bald eagle. The sad part of the story is the species listed kind of in dark red below upland sandpiper, which is an endangered species now, western meadowlark, which has declined over 90% from what it was in the 1950s, boreal chickadee, Canada jay, blackback woodpecker, Connecticut warbler is almost completely wiped out from the state of Wisconsin. A few are seen still in migration, but you have to count yourself lucky when you find one. But the breeding area in the northwestern part of the state has almost no Connecticut's left anymore. White-winged crossbill, northern bobwhite is another species whose population has almost completely collapsed. Evening grosbeak and gray partridge, which is another one which is mostly gone. Interesting, another map over on the far lower left corner there. Uh, the number of species found in a county. You can see, and probably it won't surprise you that those northernmost counties have the most species in them, obviously because they have the most bird habitat. Uh, you can call out Menominee County there. Uh, Probably just wasn't surveyed quite as well as some of the other northern counties. A few of those western counties on the Mississippi River side also, they still had between 80 and 93 species, but they didn't maybe get the amount of effort applied to them that some of the northern counties did. So first ever glossy ibis breeding in Wisconsin. Uh, some of the species that were not confirmed breeding during Atlas 1 that were confirmed this time, king rail, canvasback, bufflehead, whooping crane, that's a big conservation success story, glossy ibis, Mississippi kite, Eurasian collared dove, great white-eyed vireo, great tit, Kirtland's warbler, of course, yellow-throated warbler, blue grosbeak, only a couple of records, and European goldfinch, all in the southeastern corner of the state. So the Atlas was a massive project that's the analysis is being completed right now, and we expect the book of the second Atlas to be published in 2026. So here is a look at just one species and how it's changed over the years. So the map on the far left is from Sam Robbins' book, Wisconsin Bird Life, that was published in 1991, showed what we thought of as osprey breeding range at that time, right? The northern third of the state had most of the population of osprey. Atlas 1 map showed some increase, and we know that to be true. Osprey has been tremendously successful in areas of the state where it probably hasn't bred in over 100 years, and that was continued on into Atlas 2, which you can see the results of in the map on the far lower right. We now have breeding ospreys in about 62 or 63 counties out of the 72 total in the state. So it's a tremendous uptick in numbers of this bird, partly due to the efforts of conservationists who have erected nesting platforms for them. You can see a photo of one of those in the upper right. Uh, the utility companies have been partners on those projects, and have done a great job on that. So Osprey is definitely a conservation success story. So this map displays the recently completed 16,000 point counts in every county of the state on the second Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas. This makes possible a much improved abundance estimate for many species assessed by the Atlas. Atlas 1 did not do as good of a job of assessing abundance. We have a much better set of data for Atlas 2, and it's going to result in the production of new maps that show the abundance of all those 200 plus species that we found breeding in the state. So for utilizing really large scale, what is known by some people as big data, uh, eBird, I hope you participate in it at some level. It's very easy to do. Uh, for those people who are still not familiar with eBird, just get my email address from Tim at some point and give me a call when you're sitting in front of your computer, and I can walk you through how to get involved in it. So everyone's bird sightings are important. They are added to a worldwide total of millions of data points, which gives us a much truer picture up to the present day of abundance and distribution for all of these species, including some what we call conservation dependent species that really would blink out in the United States except for the efforts of conservation action. So you can see the result of this. I have to tell you, in case you don't know this, American kestrel has greatly declined. You can see really major declines there in the western U.S. The brighter the color and the more closely spaced those uh, boxes are, the more thorough the data is for that. But you can look at Wisconsin and you can see uh, clearly there's decline registering in the upper Midwest as well. Uh, you see very few areas of this map that are in blue. Blue registers increase. So the picture for American kestrels is not very hopeful. We're still trying to understand what's driving the decline. It has many ecological problems. It's linked to a number of different factors, and rest assured, there are quite a few people working on this and trying to get to the bottom of it. So in 2025, we released the biannual State of the Birds report in March by a consortium of scientific and conservation organizations and entities led by the North American Bird Conservation Initiative. The report shows that bird populations in America continue to decline across all mainland and marine habitats, with 229 species requiring urgent conservation action. According to the report, more than one-third of U.S. bird species are of high or moderate conservation concern, with 112 what they call tipping point species, which have lost more than 50% of their population in the last 50 years. These include 42 red alert species with very low populations, which are at risk of extinction without immediate intervention. So last up here, I'm going to show you a few things about red-headed woodpeckers. I've done a lot of work on those. I did a project back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, uh, looking at 55 breeding bird survey routes. 53 demonstrated a negative population trend. Only 2 exhibited an increasing population trend, which you can see marked there in green. I can only find one, as a matter of fact, on this map. Oh, well, there is another one, but I don't see where it is right now. At any rate, all of those marked in red had declines. But this is not the whole picture for this species by any means. So I analyzed all this landscape across these 55 routes and looked at landscape features and habitat loss. I examined 8 breeding bird survey routes in detail using air photos of each route from 2 time periods 25 years apart, in the 1970s and again in the 1990s. There's a composite from 45 years ago on one breeding bird survey route near the Mississippi River. To each airfoil composite, I added the route as a new line in ArcGIS, that's a GIS software, along with a buffer 500 meters on each side of the route. This 1,000-meter wide zone was the sampled area within which I analyzed habitat patches. I delineated them and measured them. Areas of woodland habitat within those sampled areas were digitized as polygons. Woodland patches of any size and configuration were measured, including with trees within 3 to 4 crown diameters of one another, as well as large individual mature trees. So you can see those polygons that result from that kind of analysis. The outer and lower, the upper and lower line are the lines of that 1,000-meter wide buffer zone, and all of those areas in magenta are actual habitat that would be suitable for this species. This is just along one route, the Princeton route, between two time periods. Where woodland habitat has increased since the 70s, in many cases, those trees are not large enough in diameter or old enough to have become potential red-headed woodpecker nest sites. Red-headed woodpeckers, unlike some other woodpecker species, need dead and dying trees to excavate their cavity in. So if you look at a pileated woodpecker by comparison, they can easily excavate into a live tree trunk, but redheads never do that. They always use a dead tree, which we refer to as a snag, or a live tree with at least some dead limbs. Three of the 8 breeding bird survey routes analyze habitat area increases ranging from 10% to 30%. The other five showed habitat area loss ranging from minus 2.5 to minus 38%. So here's the Beaver Dam breeding bird survey route in Dodge County. This is a pretty agricultural landscape where 38% of the woodland habitat has been lost. You can see very small areas of woodland habitat along that route. The red-headed woodpecker population in this particular area declined over 95% in that time period. The analysis of the landscape metric, the change in habitat area, and the change in population of red-headed woodpeckers was done for all 8 of those routes using what's called a Spearman rank correlation test. The null hypothesis was that there was no correlation between the change in habitat area and the red-headed woodpecker numbers. The alternative hypothesis was that there is a correlation, and I was able to show clearly that there was. So you can see the names of the routes on the left-hand column, the change in red-headed woodpecker counts, uh, including some drastic declines of over 90%, some over 50%, some over 80%. So amount of loss over that time period. So here's the statistics for anyone who's interested in that. My hypothesis was as given in the graphic there using a table value. The test statistic was determined to be 0.643. The critical value was 0.8095. Therefore, I reject. What does this mean? This test determines that there is a correlation between change in woodland area and the percent change in numbers of the red-headed woodpecker. So, but that's not the end of the story. The loss of open oak woodland along Wisconsin breeding bird survey routes was likely a factor in red-headed woodpecker decline. However, tree diseases bring about tree mortality, and we know that we're going through the the entrance into another major tree disease. The major tree disease we were experiencing in the 60s and 70s and 80s, which was Dutch elm disease, which killed many trees and for a relatively short period of time actually allowed an increase in red-headed woodpecker populations. But those trees were either cut down or blew down in windstorms if they were in a forest. And by the end of the 80s, a lot of that dead wood had been taken out of the state picture. Now we've got emerald ash borer since 2008 coming in and doing a similar job on a different set of species of trees. Instead of elms, now it's affecting ashes. So will emerald ash borer create more red-headed woodpecker habitat? I predict that it will and that it already is. So you can see this map of the state of Wisconsin, how emerald ash borer has spread and the dates of its entrance into those counties. Uh, it's gone well beyond Wisconsin now. It's entered some other states, including states in the far west. So ashes are definitely in trouble, but redheads may benefit from that. So that's the end of my slides. And if you'd like to ask some questions, I can take some questions.